Gonko is the owner of a very ironic devil fruit ability that allows her to cement the future. Once conjured, these arrows become destiny. But perhaps unbeknownst to Gonko, her character is being led by the narrative arrow of Echiro Oda. And it's being led in a very familiar and well-explored direction, as Gonko is almost certainly going to become the latest in a long line of beautiful female antagonist to beautiful female protagonist characters. I really cannot stress enough just how common this is. So much so that there's been at least one of this character archetype in every post-time skip arc since Dressrosa. Almost immediately after setting foot on Dressrosa, we meet a gladiator named Rebecca, who many people forget was briefly and originally an antagonist. Rebecca conspired to kill Luffy by luring him into a fiendish trap, and it was for a pretty cold reason as well. No one was forcing Rebecca to do this like how Bellamy was ordered to kill Luffy. Nah. Rebecca did this of her own volition because she knew that Luffy was powersome and that eliminating him quietly in the shadows would increase her chances of winning the Mera no Mi. So this was a bit of a speed run of this concept. We went from enemy to ally very quickly after Rebecca failed, but at the same time we had the same concept happening elsewhere on Dressrosa with Viola seducing Sanji, and she turned out to be a member of the Don Quixote family. So she was a genuine enemy, unlike Rebecca, who you could argue was just doing what she had to do in order to survive. Instead, Viola was much more of a direct antagonist. However, she flipped quite quickly as well after Sanji yelled that he would never doubt a woman's tears, after which point Viola used her literal tears to defeat all of her minions, so I shan't doubt them either. And as it turned out, she was actually a former member of Riku royalty and wanted to liberate this island from the Flamingo. Then next up we have Whole Cake Island, which is probably the best explored incarnation of this concept to date. Charlotte Pudding was again introduced as an ally, but then was actually an enemy, but then became a mostly ally, once again thanks to Sanji. And this trend would of course continue into Wano, as Kozuki Hiyori was originally presented to us as the cold-hearted Komurasaki, a woman who makes a living by seducing men, sucking them dry in every way except the one it is they want, leaving them destitute and doing it all with the cute catchphrase of, "I have only scorn for the poor man." It's such a cold catchphrase. And the names of three of the men that she did this to were Bingo, Bongo, and Bungo. Bongo was an arsonist, then Bongo would price gouge the people whose houses burnt down thanks to Bungo, and Bingo would make money off the funeral of those who died in Bungo's fires. So Hiyori/Komurasaki didn't target just regular people. These three very much deserved everything that was done to them and more. But we didn't know that at the time. To us, it looks like Komurasaki was just taking advantage of some very unfortunate men. And initially, she's also presented to us as an ally of Orochi, someone who's more than happy to entertain his affections. And Komurasaki was so infamously evil that people were actually concerned for Orochi's well-being, which is wild, but that is the facade that Hiyori and Denjiro built up with the Komurasaki persona. And as per usual, that all breaks down. Komurasaki does an immediate about-face and becomes a much more standard Oda woman in distress. And one very common trait that all of these women share is that they lead fake lives, generally to put up a strong exterior to protect their inevitably fragile selves. And on Egghead Island, Stussy follows in that path as well, having been introduced twice as a villain, once as an underworld emperor, and then as a member of CP0, before finally settling in as an ally of Vegapunk and the Straw Hats with a strong emotional desire. And you know what? You might even be able to throw Lilith in there. She was an antagonist for all of one chapter, so I don't know if I really count her, but I guess you could. Either way, this is a pattern that's very difficult to ignore post-time skip. With the exception of Zoe and the Reverie arc, every arc from Dressrosa onwards has featured at least one classically beautiful Oda woman who initially stands against us, only for her to switch sides and join the ever-growing Straw Hat harem. And I should say that this precedent isn't exclusive to post-time skip One Piece. It's just that in the post-time skip, this device gets used a lot more than in pre-time skip. But Nami, Vivi, and Robin, three very core Straw Hat members, were all antagonists at some point turned allies, as was Boa Hancock much later on. So if Oda does introduce a pretty-some woman, chances are she's already on the road to redemption, which we can even see with more side characters like Perona. Although there are notable exceptions to this. Califa from CP9 is a pretty big one. She had all of the essential ingredients to flip, but has remained an antagonist, as did Monet on Punk Hazard until she came to the end of her life, having her heart viciously stabbed by a maniacal clown. And most recently on Wano, Black Maria is also a pretty standout example. Although that may be cancelled out by Ulti essentially becoming an ally now as well. And I'll also say that Egghead Island featured York doing the exact opposite of our trope as well. She was an ally and then turned into what I imagine is a very permanent enemy. So there are are exceptions. The system is not infallible. But the general trend and consensus is that beautiful female villain tends to become beautiful female not villain. Which brings us to Gonko on Elbaf. Because while nothing is guaranteed, each passing chapter makes it harder for me to believe that she will remain as an antagonist. Despite being a holy knight, Oda is going to some pretty interesting lengths to keep Gonko separated from the concept of world nobility. Every other holy knight on Elbaf so far has been accompanied by an introduction box confirming their sainthood and stating their family connection. Saint Figaland Shamrock, Saint Remo Shifu Gillingham, and Saint Shepard Summers, who's particularly interesting because he's from the same family as Elder Star Saint Shepard Jupiter. However, Gunko's introduction box by comparison is incredibly bare, just stating Holy Knight Gonko, effectively confirming that she is not a world noble. And I do think that her words to Loki give us some insight into her potentially very interesting heritage. When attempting to recruit Loki to the Holy Knights, Gonko states, "A member of the common rabble receiving a chance to join the ranks of gods is a miracle one can only dream of. And we are offering you that miracle now." And so I would suspect that Gonko herself was a member of the quote common rabble who was offered the chance to join the ranks of gods. An elevation of status that she authentically considers to be a miracle. And that's why she can't understand Loki refusing the offer. I feel like many full world nobles would treat Loki like more of an animal, that they're offering him a better chance, but his existence, it's too stupid and inferior to process it. Like offering a dog $1,000. Mate, the dog could do a lot with that kind of money, but it doesn't know what or how or what the money represents. It's a dog. Gonko doesn't have that mindset though. She's able to identify with these lower class commoners. Disgusting. And Oda has kept her very mentally distinct from her world noble associates. One very subtle thing Oda did in chapter 1143 was when we see Gonko, Killingham, and Summers having a delightful afternoon tea on Elbaf, and Oda focuses on the contrast of how Saint Summers eats versus how Gonko eats. With Summers, we have a close-up of a very arrogantly drawn man stuffing his face with food that he believes he's entitled to. There's nothing special about this experience to Saint Summers. It's expected that he consumes only the finest of delicious dream dinners each and every day. But then we see Gonko eating the same food, and she's amazed by how good it tastes. It's so good that it's having a physical effect on Gonko, even making her blush a little. It's a very humble expression of the joy that food can bring someone, none of which is present in the panel of Saint Summers eating. And many people may think that I'm reading far too much into this, but mate, this is a much bigger deal than you think. Because Oda uses this food contrast quite a bit to indicate someone's general sense of right and wrong. And what Gonko reminds me of is Tama's reaction to tasting Kiku's Oshiriko during early Wano. There was something so extremely innocent, heartwarming, yet tragic about Tama exclaiming that she never knew that food could be this good. It's so good that it makes Tama grateful that she's even alive, just so that she could have this experience of tasting it. Meanwhile, to those who occupy the world noble equivalent positions on Wano, the Beast Pirates, they take Oshiriko for granted. So much so that they purposely spill it because it doesn't go well with their drinks. Now, Saint Summers doesn't go that far, but we have that same dynamic of entitlement versus gratitude. Even though it's dream food and it gives us no nutritional benefits, Gonko is still so grateful to have tasted it. And while I wouldn't bet the 1,000 Sunny on this factor alone, Oda is very purposeful in defining characters through their relationships with food. Whenever someone's eating, you can tell everything you need to know about them just by observing that action, which is why we usually have a big banquet at the end of arcs, so that all of our very, very good characters can be shown at their absolute purest and happiest. So the visual language of One Piece to date is telling me pretty powerfully that Gonko should have a decent heart. We'll see if that goes on to be true, but that's not all. As the role Gonko currently inhabits on Elbaf is also very closely tied to the history of storytelling in general, most prominently in the theater. In ancient Greek and Roman comedy plays, there is an established dynamic of the exceptionally smart slave/servant and the bumbling master, which is a dynamic that persisted all the way to Shakespeare. Many of his plays feature the lower status characters being the wiser individuals, and it's something that you still see to this very day. I guess a more modern example of this would be the intelligent salary worker and the incompetent office manager. That is the role that Gonko seems to fill at the moment. As far as we're aware, Shamrock has left her on Elbaf with St. Summers and St. Killingham, each of them possessing far higher status than Gonko, but both of them also possess heavily detrimental comedic qualities that seem to mentally exhaust her. And it's very much the responsibility of Gonko to stay on track here. She's the one that says we shouldn't ignore the presence of Luffy, dude's an emperor after all, and she's also the one to flag a fear of Nika. And Gonko also gets actively annoyed at Saint Summers especially, and I think that's because he doesn't live up to what her belief of a world noble should be, which is unfortunate because Saint Summers is perfectly representative of your average world noble, and Gonko has shown no interest in the way that he and other nobles entertain themselves. And in fact, Gonko has even shown an active distaste for it. In chapter 1143, Saint Summers has this elaborate and poetic-some speech. Love is the passion to reach out and squeeze someone tight, even as you see the thorns up close. The best part of this game is when it's parents and children. Parents hug their kids tight, thorns and all. And when the kids scream and wail when they see their worst nightmare, mummy and daddy dying in agony, there's real emotion in killing. Death by love. Isn't that just so exciting? To which Gonko replies with nothing. She doesn't say anything, just an ellipsis. So she does not in any way appreciate or understand what Saint Summers is trying to create, that or she does understand it and is actively horrified or disgusted by it to the point where she just needs to disengage and ignore it. So Gonko has shown a lot of reverence for the status of a world noble, but she's not shown any interest in their lifestyle. And if anything, she actively retreats from it with her regular rituals of listening to the music of our very own Soul King Brook. In chapter 1144, Gonko revealed that she was listening to a song titled New World, which is the song that Brook performed on Sabadi right before reuniting with the crew. The trend of pretty women flipping, the barrier being erected between Gonko and the world nobles, all the food theory stuff, none of it is anywhere near as in your face as Gonko listening to this song. Because at its core, New World is a song about changing fate and also asking to see panties. Brook wrote it specifically for the return to Sabadi, as that was the island where the Straw Hats were obliterated by Kizaru, Sentamaru, Bartholomew Kuma, and also a third, Bartholomew Kuma. So Brook saw Sabadi as an island of regret. But he also viewed it as his job, his responsibility as crew musician to turn that regret into hope, into excitement, and into a message of new beginnings. Brook is the one who changed and set the tone for the Straw Hats to recover and excel, and Gonko may have a very similar thematic ability. Her Devil Fruit is all about direction and cementing the future by dictating that direction. Once Gonko conjures an arrow and decides where it's pointing, we don't know if that future can be prevented. I mean, we do. At the moment, it can be prevented by exactly one person. As Gonko herself says, those arrows are the confirmed path of my very future. A declaration of unavoidable violence. But it is possible for me to change course, which to me just screams like a character saying, yeah, I know I'm on a bad path right now, but it is possible for me to change. And of the many legendary lines Brook has had over his run in the series, one of my favorites came right before he started performing New World when he stated, music is always on our side. So I can't help but look at Gonko listening to this music and see her as on our side, because music is always on our side. And after learning the name of the song New World, Saint Summers asked, Gee ha ha ha, what? You got a problem with the one we already live in? And the answer to that has to be yes. Even if Gonko won't verbalize it or take a stand against it, there is something unsettling to Gonko about the world we currently live in. Yes, she considers it to be a miracle that she was allowed to join the Holy Knights, and she does recognize the superiority of world nobles over all other living beings, but that doesn't mean that Gonko likes it. And as soon as her mindset is liberated by Gonko being shown a new potential path forward, I have to believe, in her own words, that it will be possible for Gonko to change course, with the big major barrier to break being her fear of Nika. Gonko has stated that her greatest fear in this world is Nika, which is going to be a pretty big problem, as Luffy is the modern day embodiment of the sun god. This fear is quite understandable though, and it's not just because of Gunko's association with the world nobles. Initially, it's very easy to write this off because all of world noble society has a fear of anything to do with the will of D, believing them to be actual demons, all of which leads back to the legacy of Joy Boy, and even further back than that to sun god Nika. But the world nobles are not the only civilization that feared Nika. According to the Harley text, Nika is a liberator and a destroyer, so I could very much see Gonko being from a lower class civilization that were taught exclusively the destroyer reading of Nika. In the same sort of way, the Buccaneers seem to have exclusively passed down the liberation reading of Nika. And that's another reason why Gonko could consider joining the Holy Knights a miracle. She may see the world government as people who rescued her from the potential destruction at the hands of Nika. A very noble, very brave organization determined to protect the planet from the sheer Ragnarok that Nika wants to bring. So when Gonko can't understand why Loki won't join, from her perspective, this could be like Loki denying his own salvation and instead choosing to be condemned them. So I think that what we're eventually going to have here is Gonko being confronted with Gear 5th Luffy, and Luffy proving to her that Nika is nothing to be afraid of, which could redefine her entire perspective of the world government. Due to this fear being flagged, I also can't help but feel that this is going to be used by Saint Killingham at some point with his dream powers, that the world nobles might get put in a very desperate situation where they pull out Gunko's nightmare to help them fight, and we see a much more viscerally horrifying incarnation of Nika than even the evil Nika that was conjured by one of the giant kids. At the moment on Elbaf, everyone's trying to overcome their nightmares, and that may not be a theme exclusive to our protagonists. This arc could also be about Gonko facing her nightmare and overcoming it, waking up and being able to start a new day working towards building a new world, which is not something that's going to come to fruition if she remains with the same old Holy Knights. But luckily, Gonko herself does know that she and she alone has the ability to change her life's course.